It's not about generating more leads. It's about strategically nurturing the leads that we bring in and creating demand that will determine the health and scalability of your business revenue and set your business apart. So let's fix it. Now, before we get started, I want to do a quick introduction if you're new here. My name is Nas Echeverria at Next Level Up CEO, and we help you use the Netflix effect to get your leads to sell themselves. And if you haven't already done so, we want to invite you to click subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss any future videos, and check the video's description down below for some free resources to get you started. Now, welcome back to the Business Real Talk. And on this episode, we're going to get right into it and start talking about what it means to have a lead nurturing system in place that actually generates demand into your business so you have people ready to say yes when they move to that next stage. Now, unpopular opinion, most leads are lost in this nurturing stage. And even more unpopular is that your inability to nail a nurturing strategy will cost you millions over the lifetime of your business. Now, lead nurturing might be one of the most overlooked yet lucrative business strategies. And because I'm all about giving you proof of what's possible, let me show you what this looks like with actual client results. So my client, Michelle, was able to make $60,000 in just 1 month as a relationship coach without generating any new leads into her business using this nurture strategy that I'm going to share with you here today. And Jane went from an average of 60 to 90 days as her sales cycle to having leads in her pipeline buying in as little as 48 hours. And Barbara was able to convert 85% of her leads to a brand new interactive masterclass using this simple shift in her lead nurture strategy. This is why your lead nurture strategy should absolutely take priority in the next stage of scaling. And I want to be able to answer the exact questions you have. So we're trying something fun and new for this episode by answering actual questions that have come from our audience that were submitted in advance of the show. So stick around because we're going to answer those at the end. And if you want to submit your questions for our next episode, make sure you head on over to our website and subscribe to our podcast updates over at nextlevelupceo.com/podcast. Now, newsflash, lead generation is no longer the star of the show because leads are great, but they're absolutely nothing without an effective way to nurture them to buy quickly and effectively. So let's talk about what it actually means to understand the intent behind lead generation and why it's not the most important factor within what you're doing. Now, the intent that you bring people into your pipeline, AKA your lead generation process, is vastly going to shift the way that you're actually able to convert those leads. You need to understand the concept between lead generation and creating demand. And a great way to illustrate this is if you've ever been on vacation somewhere beautiful, like Hawaii or the beach in San Diego or sunny Florida, and someone walks up to you and offers you this unheard of opportunity, like free tickets to Disney World or a 3-night stay at a 5-star resort, and they say it's completely free. Hands up if you've ever experienced that. Now, I was 10 the first time I was walking through a hotel lobby in Florida with my dad when a well-dressed man told my dad that he could get us 5 tickets to Disney World for absolutely free. Now, my dad stopped in his tracks and he asked how. And the man mentioned that all he had to do was attend a 45-minute presentation, and at the end, he'd get his tickets, free tickets. So he dragged all of us to that boring presentation, and you guessed it, it was a timeshare presentation that we begrudgingly had to sit through at the end to get those 5 free tickets, only to find out that we had to come back again tomorrow to not be charged for them. Now, what I want you to understand is that's a perfect example of setting someone up with the wrong intent in order to get an outcome that we desire. Your intent will absolutely directly impact the outcome that you want to get because the intent we use to bring people in will largely play a role on how we nurture and whether or not that person ends up converting into a client. In the example that I used about the timeshare presentation, they brought us in under the intent of getting a free ticket. We had absolutely no intent to buy because we wanted one thing and one thing only. I see this happen so often in the business world, and you might cringe because you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I don't want to be a timeshare salesman. But maybe you've learned tactics and strategies that forced you to try and bring people under one context of, hey, I'm just going to give you tons of free value. But realistically, all you're trying to do is push them to a sell. So how do we actually go about doing this? How do we create the right type of intent without feeling like we're tricking people into it or creating bait and switch processes that only make us feel more uncomfortable and bring people in who aren't ready to buy. Now, what we want to be able to understand is the difference in the types of intent of what we're bringing in. So, oftentimes we see sales and marketing as different entities. And what I want you to realize is that oftentimes when we learn marketing, we've been taught to create intent to consume. So, we're asking people to come into your world simply to get a free ride and gather free information. Now, this at its core isn't necessarily wrong because you're creating interest and intrigue, and that is the goal of marketing. But the problem is we're bringing people in under the impression that all they're there for is to DIY their way to success, then we're absolutely going to be stuck with the wrong type of people in our audience and feeling really frustrated in order to get there. Versus when we create sales intent from day one, then we're setting people up to come into knowing that they want to work with you and that they want to pay someone to solve their problem. So let me share some examples with you with real life situations that have happened to my clients so you can see firsthand what this actually looks like. Now, recently I had a client who was in my Growth Bridge program, and she came to me saying that she couldn't figure out why so many people seemed interested, but then they got on a call with her and ended up ghosting her after. Now, originally, she was trying to figure out how she could perfect her sales call. And this is such a common thing I see so often is that we are forced to fix the wrong problem because we're only looking at what's happening in that direct situation. So in her case, she thought people were super interested, but when they got on that sales call, and even then when they seemed interested, they were ghosting her afterwards, and she couldn't understand what the problem was with her actual sales process. And I see it all the time where people are agonizing over fixing the wrong thing because they struggle to see where that intent was missed in the process. So in her case, her call strategy was impeccable. We did a review, we looked at what that process looked like, and it wasn't actually in the sales call that had led her to being ghosted after the person had shown interest. Now, what most people skip is actually identifying the entire intent timeline. So, what we did is we reviewed her entire intent timeline from the time somebody gets introduced to her all the way to what we actually did to move them to book a call. So in her case, we reviewed the DMs and the conversation that was happening that led to that call booking. And instantly I could spot that the problem was that her DM strategy, and more specifically, how she had positioned her call itself, was getting people on the call with the wrong intent, and therefore they weren't ready to purchase. See, what she was doing was she was positioning that call as a free coaching session, which meant that those people who were getting on the call with her were not coming on with sales or buying intent. This is what I call an intent disconnect, and it can show up in a multitude of ways. But this example was specifically when we're looking at why her conversions weren't happening on the call itself. So a great example of this is if you right now you're getting interested people from your marketing content, but you're struggling to move them from that initial interest into booking a call. Now, your initial thought may be that the problem was your DM strategy. Like maybe you struggled in that DM strategy to get them to book a call, and that was the problem. But the reality is that it most likely could have come from your marketing strategy and how that intent was actually positioned in your marketing content. Because again, I want you to understand there's an intent timeline. It doesn't just happen in one singular piece, it's a different checkpoints, different processes within that that set that intent every step of the way. So an example of this might be that you've created a perfect piece of content that's built massive intent, and maybe you've gotten people interested. The problem was your call to action, and that it simply stated to people that you'll give them a free training to solve their problem, and it set them up with this intent to consume, not to book a call with you. So again, what this looks like is people who do appointment setting who are just trying to get as many people as possible in hopes of that's just going to convert into a booked call if I can push them enough. And again, the problem becomes that we set those people up with the wrong intent from the very beginning. So it's so important. And one of the biggest things we do with our clients is actually look at the complete intent timeline so that we can actually diagnose where there's an intent disconnect. So you need to be able to look at your process in the complete marketing and client acquisition process and ask yourself, where is that break in my process? So, a quick way to understand this is marketing is what's going to trigger and create intent. This is what's going to get people interested, saying, yes, I want to learn more. That's what's going to set the tone for getting more people into that next stage. Nurturing is what's going to create demand, and sales conversations are what's going to convert that demand into paying clients. Each of them are completely important, but require a different strategy based on each of those pieces of the puzzle. So today we're talking about how to actually leverage that nurturing process so that you can create demand where people are ready to make purchasing and buying decisions. So your natural next question might be, okay, Nas, this is great and all, but how do I actually leverage that into turning that intent to nurture my leads and get them to buy? So let's get into it. We've already established that intent determines the strategy. So if we want to set up sales intent from the very first introduction to you, then we need to be able to acknowledge that the way that we market is going to be based on someone's level of intent, and that their level of intent shifts the strategy. That might sound confusing, but it's not. Let me explain. If your goal is to get your leads to buy faster and more frequently, your nurture strategy needs to take this into consideration. And a great way for you to understand this is that there are different levels of intent within your audience. I'm not going to break that down on today's episode, but if you missed the episode where we break down all three levels of intent and what those different buying behaviors look like, head on over to episode number 43, where I break down in detail the different levels of buying intent and how those behaviors really get shifted. Now, in general, you're going to hear me talk a lot about the power of marketing to high intent leads. And it's true, high intent leads are the dream and the creme de la creme of leads. But the reality is, you'd be leaving millions of dollars on the table if you don't actually understand how to layer your strategy with supporting mid intent leads. So, I, at no given point in our process, foster to or cater to low intent leads because it's a completely different strategy, and their buying behavior actually requires a really long timeline and oftentimes doesn't lead to sales directly. So in this case, again, everything that we do and everything I teach inside the EasyS method is specifically focused on speaking to our high intent and our mid intent leads. So how do we actually go about supporting these both different levels of intent within your lead nurturing strategy? I want you to think of it like a highway. Your sales highway has three lanes. On the left lane is your fast lane. This is where high intent leads can quickly drive down to make decisions. Now, the middle lane is your passing lane. This is for your mid intent leads. And the reason behind this is because the effectiveness behind your nurture strategy will directly affect whether they move into the fast lane and become a high intent lead or move into the slow lane and become a low intent lead. Now, the last lane is the slow lane, AKA where your low intent leads will hang out and slowly walk around, looking around at the sites, but not ready to make a purchase. Now, I've mentioned this before, but we do not cater to those low intent leads. And I want you to think about it this way. Imagine that you're in a rush and you want to get to the 4:15 p.m. showing of a movie you're really, really excited to see. Maybe it's Spider-Man that's coming out, and you need to get there quickly. You're going to want to get on that fast lane and drive as quickly as possible because your level of intent to creating and solving the problem is at its highest level. Now, instead, let's say you've got an hour to kill before the showing starts, and you're not even really that excited to see the movie. You're not sure. You kind of think it sounds good, but you also are wondering if maybe you should just stop by the Mexican restaurant and have a really delicious meal. Your level of intent is at a mid level, meaning you're going to operate differently. You're going to go slowly. You may not even take the freeway. You might just kind of hang out and take the back streets and take things slow. You need to understand those different levels of intent are absolutely going to affect the way we market and nurture our leads specifically. So, your high intent leads need brevity. They don't want to sit through dozens of emails in your nurture sequence to decide they want to work with you. They want to read a piece of content you posted on LinkedIn and navigate to your page through your bingeable sales system, book a call, be ready to buy by the time you wake up tomorrow. And they want this very self led buying process versus your mid intent lead might read a piece of content you posted in a LinkedIn group and they navigate to your page and they read dozens of pieces of your content on that page itself. They navigate to your podcast. They listen to a few of those. They read through your emails. Maybe they purchase your upcoming interactive workshop. They send you a DM to ask some questions, so on and so on. The difference between the two is their need for a different nurture process. Now, I want to ask you this question. Does your current process for how you are actually nurturing leads take into consideration and segment those people into two different buying processes? If the answer is no, this is where you need to be looking at how to actually segment that audience first and foremost, but also being able to understand how you really direct towards those people based on their buying behaviors. Now, I'm going to take into consideration that maybe you do have a high intent process, something that makes it really quick and easy, an on demand process. Someone can come into your world without ever having a conversation with you and instantly make a decision that they want to move to the next step with you, whether that's booking a call or making a purchase. Now, on the other side, most of us have a ton of mid intent leads who aren't actually moving over that threshold and saying yes. So mid intent leads make decisions completely differently. And the biggest thing I want you to take into consideration when trying to nurture them is that they generally are kinesthetic learners. So a kinesthetic learner is someone who does tactile learning that requires them to manipulate or touch the material in order to learn. So what that means is in order for them to pass from a mid intent lead and into a high intent lead, they need to touch and feel and experience what you're actually doing in order to actively and confidently make a decision. So that means they're going to need to read a piece of content, then watch a video, listen to a podcast, have a DM conversation, or be a part of an interactive event with you in order to hear, see, touch, and experience before they can move forward. Now, this doesn't mean that we just throw them out into the world and hope that they get to that response. We actually need to set up and create a pathway, a treasure map of sorts, where they can read, see, hear, and experience your genius, and it satisfies their individualized decision psychology, allowing them to make swift decisions. This is why we teach a multidimensional buying ecosystem that approaches individual buying triggers through a kinesthetic process. So, what I mean by this is when people come into our world, we are automatically segmenting them into high intent and mid intent leads, understanding and acknowledging they make decisions differently. So, when someone comes in and they watch or listen our bingeable sales system, then when we segment them, we're able to determine whether or not they're high intent or mid intent. Based on that, now we're putting them into a system for our mid intent leads to further make that decision through a multidimensional approach. So we give them email content layered with podcast audios, layered with DM conversations, and giving them the opportunity to jump into a interactive workshop or some other opportunity to feel firsthand what it's like to work with us. This is done absolutely on purpose because we acknowledge and understand that our mid intent leads are more kinesthetic learners. So, again, an example might be they come into our bingeable sales system, they get segmented into an audience of mid intent leads, they read some of our content via email and social media that's specifically speaking to different trigger points that I'm not covering here today. Then they move into a DM conversation with us, they listen to that podcast episode or join into an interactive workshop, and then they're moved into that next step where they can now make a buying decision. We need to be able to support people to make decisions in their own style with their own experiences because it's a full body experience for each and every single one of our prospective leads. So while the process matters, it's not just about stringing together random things. There's a formula that taps into three psychological triggers that actually move leads to purchase rather than simply being friend zoned. Now, we've all experienced it before where we've spent countless hours, so much time trying to nurture a lead in hopes that they're going to make a purchase. And maybe you've DM'd them, gone back and forth, invited them to a sales call. Maybe they've had multiple sales calls with you, and maybe they've purchased low ticket offers, but they've never really made that shift, that next step to becoming a client where you really want them to be. Now, what I'm going to share with you here today is what we call our pre-formula, okay? PRE formula. Now, I want to just recap one quick thing because it sets the tone for what I'm about to share with you. Now, again, as a reminder, marketing is meant to trigger intent. This is what's going to determine whether or not you're bringing people in with the highest level of intent at the beginning of the process. So remember, I tapped this into you at the very beginning, sharing with you that it's really important for us to really acknowledge that that we're bringing people in with the right intent from the very beginning, because there are different trigger points for that intent throughout the process. Now, what we've been covering here today is about lead nurturing, and lead nurturing is what creates demand, gets people to really say, okay, yes, I need this. So while marketing is going to get them into that interest zone, feeling like this sounds exciting, I like this idea, nurturing is what's actually going to create demand and saying, I want this solution. Okay. And a sales conversation is going to convert that demand into actual buying power. Our goal with the pre-formula is to create demand, AKA people moving into the next step of booking a call or getting into sales conversations with buying intent. Okay. So this is my proven formula that nurtures leads and creates demand by tapping into 3 key psychological factors. Now, P stands for proof, R stands for relationships, and E stands for experience. Notice that these are all things that we've maybe touched on and discussed throughout this process. Now, proof is simple. They need to be able to prove to themselves that this process is going to work for them specifically. Great way to do this is actually offering social proof throughout your marketing process. This means sharing client case studies, explaining what you've built in as what we call like results mechanisms in order to help people support in getting to that result, and having a process that proves to them that this isn't just something that works for some people, but that can specifically work for them as well. Now, keep in mind, one of the biggest things that I share with people is when we're giving proof, the more we can give specific ways of understanding what's going to work for them versus what's not, it's just as important to be able to magnetize as it is to repel. So being sure that we can really clearly state for them who this is for and who this is not for. Now, your marketing strategy should have proof built into the process. If it doesn't, that's a topic for a different conversation. Through our marketing process, we build that proof section throughout the entire marketing and content system, because we understand that if we acknowledge and speak to that proof ahead of time, we're actually removing a lot of the objections that come up when we lack that proof in the process. Now, the second thing that we talked about was relationships. It cannot be stated loudly enough that the way that we create and leverage relationships is ultimately going to determine how quickly someone moves through the process. So even though we have an automated system in our bingeable sales system, we still layer relationships within that process because we understand that everybody makes buying decisions differently. So having that approach where they can kind of feel into you as a person is going to matter so much more than a lot of the other things that you might be focusing on. Ways that we do this is we actually integrate DM conversations into our strategy because we want to ensure that people can really build individualized relationships with us. Another great approach to this that some of our clients are using are things like interactive workshops, brainstorming sessions, questions where they're able to come on to a session where they're asking questions and getting things answered. It's just a way for us to support that deeper level of relationship building that ultimately builds trust and gets people to purchase. The third and last piece is experiential. Experiential is one of the biggest and most important things, and one thing that I personally still struggle with and I'm still working through. So we've built in experiential opportunities with people because we understand that experiential opportunities like interactive workshops are going to allow people to not only build trust, but also for them to experience firsthand what it's like working with you. So these are great things like paid workshops that you create or free workshops. But again, there's a huge strategy that goes behind it. But the key behind having an experience is letting people feel firsthand what it's like to be in your world. I can talk left, right, center about how we operate in a way where it's really no fluff, straight to the point, and it's really rooted in my specific strategy method. And a lot of people will say, well, yeah, that sounds great, right? I've experienced something maybe like that before. Our brains naturally make that connection until they actually experience a container with me. So when they're in that room with me, sometimes that's what takes them over the edge of experiencing how I do things differently. So I want to really be able to share with you guys that the PRE process and technique is really rooted in understanding those 3 psychological differences and trigger points that get people to make a purchase. So if you have people who are not quite there, that you feel like are right on the edge of making a decision, then I would suggest looking at how to optimize and leverage the PRE method within your business so that you can actually get people to make a decision. Now, Everything I've shared with you here today is just a single tiny piece of the puzzle of what our easiest method is. And don't forget, in just a minute, I'm going to go through your Q&A, the questions that you guys submitted in advance directly here. So stick around. But what I want to share with you is why we're so crazy about the easiest method is because we're looking at the holistic strategy of what it takes to not only bring in clients, but retain those clients and create a successful and sustainable and profitable business. And it starts with how we actually determine or innovative gap methodology. So here today we talked about the nurturing strategy, the part of client acquisition that comes after. But what we talked about also was what it means to actually set intent from the very beginning. Having our innovative gap methodology sets the intent that we're bringing people in who want to make purchasing decisions and who are a higher level of client. And creating that innovative gap methodology creates a true market of one where you become the only and incomparable solution. This allows my clients to 5 to 10x their prices and have clients who happily line up to wanting to work with them because they've created inbound demand. Step two is actually having the sales system that actually drives results and creates inbound demand so that those clients are able to sell themselves. This is where we layer those two pieces of the puzzle of having our bingeable sales system that can segment our audience and actually get our high intent leads to create self-led purchasing decisions, while also having a different space for our mid-intent leads by addressing their specific emotional triggers and also taking them on this tactile and multi-dimensional learning approach to getting to make a decision even faster. And the third and final piece is what we call our pure profit strategy that takes into account how you actually deliver your offer at scale, ensuring that you can deliver those results without any hiccups and getting them those world-class results every single time. Now I want to jump into a Q&A where we break down some of your specific questions that were submitted before this. And then again, if you want to submit your questions for the next episode, make sure you're on our email list. You can head on over to nextlevelupceo.com/podcast to get on that email list. Now, I want to jump in because Becky asked an incredible question about what it looks like to create urgency, or if I even try to create urgency for people to buy. She mentions that she has warm and hot leads, but she feels like they have a lack of urgency that's holding them back from making purchasing decisions, and that her potential customers are coming from her Facebook group where she nurtures, but they know about her and they reach out to her directly via DMs, but it doesn't actually move to booking a call. So while she shares her booking call link, it may take weeks or months before they actually book. Now, what I want to share with you, Becky, directly is that number one, it may be that you're not actually speaking to high intent buyers. So remember how we talked about at the beginning of this episode? Sometimes we feel like it's just that the problem is our DM strategy, but in reality, it's the fact that we haven't set the intent from the beginning. And maybe you haven't segmented that audience to understand correctly who they are. So first and foremost, what I'd say to you is have a segmenting process in place that's going to allow you to understand whether that person was a mid-intent lead and whether they're needing just more things along the way in order to achieve that. The second thing to take into consideration is how you actually got them into that DM conversation. A lot of people don't realize that how they actually got driven into that next step is going to really be a huge determining factor on whether we're able to convert. So I want you to look at what was it that I stated in my marketing content that led them to DMing you, and whether or not that was setting them up to make a purchasing decision, or whether that was them just seeing as a great opportunity and they want to learn more. I call the learn more people the people who need more information. And what that's a sign of is actually a marketing problem and not a sales problem. So if you're finding that people are getting into DM conversations and they're not quite ready to take the next step to book a call, most likely what's happening is they're not getting enough of the information they need to feel like they're ready to make a purchasing decision. So we're going to evaluate that inside of our marketing content and ensure that we've actually approached their specific desires and explained to them how your process works. So by the time that they're reaching out to you, they're doing so with a buying intention. The next question comes from Erica, who asks, what do you do with people that you've been nurturing for 2 or 3 years now and you feel like you're in the friend zone? How do you shift the conversation from support to sales? And this is such a great question because getting friend zoned is really frustrating when you've poured yourself into somebody, feel like you've given them so much information and they're just not making buying decisions. So one of the things we want to really look at when it comes to getting friend zoned is how we're actually conditioning our audience. I've talked about this a lot and we have a full episode that discusses conditioning, but conditioning is really what ultimately lets people know how they're going to perceive and how they're going to interact with you. So for myself, I used to get friend zoned all the time. People would come and say, "Can I pick your brain? Hey, do you mind just sharing a little bit about like what you would do in this situation?" They'd just be coming to me for free advice. And as frustrating as that was, I had to take a hard look at my process and ask myself, Am I setting them up to treat me in this way? Am I allowing them to see me as a free resource where they don't need to pay me in order to get the support they need? And if so, what am I doing? And this is a delicate balance because we don't want to feel like we're transactional and only supporting people if they pay us, but we also want to set expectations. So, really knowing and looking at how you're conditioning your audience is going to set the tone for how people really are deciding to work with you. Now, I've never really had people who are sitting in my world for 2 to 3 years. Maybe I've had someone for 6 months, and those people have specifically come to me. We've had sales conversations, and they said, let me go find the money in order to make that decision. So they're coming at this from a standpoint of, I want to make a purchase. I'm just, creating the funds and the investment opportunity in order to achieve that. That's a very different approach than someone sitting in my world for 2 to 3 years who has zero intent to purchase. That to me states that I haven't conditioned my audience to learn to buy from me. I've taught my audience how to consume from me. So again, this is going to be you taking a look at, do people see you as a resource to make a purchasing decision or as someone who they just want to hang out with? This is really like, again, I've shared this in my last episodes, and a lot of time this blows people's minds, but I set the intent that you're not coming into my world to learn how to DIY things. You're going to be really sadly mistaken every step of the way if you feel like you can DIY yourself to success by being in my world. It doesn't mean that they're not gaining tons of value. They are. I have people reach out to me all the time, but the value that I bring is creating clarity because I understand that if I inundate my people with too much information and too much learning, they're only going to be weighed down. They're not going to be able to make progress. And my goal for my people is that they create progress within their world. So I create clarity that gives way to that progress rather than inundating them with more information. So you want to be able to look at number one, am I setting up my marketing process so that people understand and recognize that clarity is what they're seeking and what they're after? And number two is, does my message actually target and speak to high intent and mid intent leads, or am I speaking to low intent leads? And that's why my sales process looks so long. So, Erica, if your sales process is looking like 2 to 3 years have gone by and they're not making purchasing decisions, then again, I most likely am dealing with someone who's a low intent. And my opportunity here is either to cut them, and I don't mean like say goodbye, I just mean like not focus my attention and energy on those people, and or to optimize for what I'm doing going forward so that we're speaking to them. And then again, I think that this is a tough thing to hear for people, but sometimes there's just a line that you're drawing in the sand. I'm very upfront and honest. I don't get called a tough love strategist for nothing, that I will let people know that you aren't in my world to just consume. And I say that with love, not because I don't want people to mooch off of me, but because I'm here for the people who want to create change. And I know that I can't do that if I'm spending all of my time talking to people who aren't actually ready for that change. So at a certain point, I draw a line in the sand and I say to people, hey, listen, you've asked for a lot of my free trainings. I just want to make sure that we're not just, inundating you with more information. I'd love to have a real conversation. That's one way. Another is like straight up in my content, I'll say to people, listen, if you're here just to consume and try and DIY your space, I'm definitely not the place you want to be. Creating that ability to repel just as much as magnetize. It's so, so important. So that's the biggest thing I'd say from that. Another great question we had from Abram over on Instagram was, how can I avoid and answer their objections without any issues? So this is one of my favorite questions because so often people think objections are a sales problem, but objections are often a marketing problem. What I mean by that is that, just like I shared with you guys here today earlier in this episode, we want to actually overcome objections before they become objections. So hesitations, questions, those things are things that we actually should have solved prior to them getting into a sales conversation. If I have not solved those ahead of time, my biggest opportunity point is actually, how can I leverage that within my marketing? Doesn't mean that we're never going to get objections. Those are obviously going to help us field what we can do further in the future in our marketing as well. But in general, what we want to look at is, can I resolve this in my marketing going forward? If the answer is yes, we want to go ahead and resolve that. And then when it comes to the objections in a sales conversation, is actually just answering those and giving an explanation that PRE still remains true, because we're giving them proof. We're giving them that relationship for them to understand specifically to their situation. So on a sales call, if someone says, hey, I'm not sure if this is going to work for me, I'm one, going to give them proof by sharing with them how it maybe worked for somebody else who's experienced something similar to them. And, or I'm going to share with them exactly how my method solves for their specific needs or struggles. That's going to give them the proof. The relationship is for me to really like acknowledge why they feel like it wouldn't work for them. So just simply asking, why do you feel like it's not going to work with you? And building that relationship of me having a give and take and being able to react and respond to that. And then lastly, like I said, is experience, letting them see, okay, well, great. Your concern is that you're not sure if the marketing content would work. Let me kind of help you see what our marketing content looks like. I might share my screen, let them look like it. So I always want to get in front of and get to a point where we're resolving that prior and in our marketing, but we also can very easily do that within our sales process. We just don't want to get into a habit of that. And another question that came from our team was just, how do I know how much to follow up with people? And a great way to look at this is that your marketing and nurture system should be setting up for regular follow-ups. So not only are you going to do this through the actual like sales conversations of, if I've had a conversation with someone, checking back in with them, hey, were you able to check out this training? So we had this conversation today on our Growth Bridge program where if I've sent a training to someone and they haven't responded back, we're going to check back in a day or two and say, hey, just wanted to make sure if you were able to check out that training. Do you have any questions? I'd love to share with you how this actually could be applied within your business. So we're going to create follow-up in that sense, but we're also not going to be nagging Nancy's. We're not going to like be all up in their face 24/7, because we talk a lot about inbound demand. My goal here isn't for you to constantly be pushing people. It's that you're actually creating that inbound, that magnetism through your marketing process. Why we talk about the marketing process so much is that our inbound system is actually built so that it's consistently creating touch points and follow-ups through the differing and varying ways that we support people's individualized triggers. So again, it's built into our marketing system so that we have those follow-ups, but we're also looking at, did I deliver something to somebody? And then what is it that I need to do to move that to the next stage? So looking at intent, looking at what we're actually driving, and then creating those checkpoints along the way, but leaving that door. So you can't just deliver a training and not say, hey, I'm going to check back in with you, or not try to move that conversation and wonder why it's not actually converting if you didn't set that intent from the get-go. So setting the intent throughout that process becomes so important. And if you want to learn more about how we can do this with you, how we partner with our clients to actually help them understand and look at their entire intent timeline, and how we actually can help you find where your intent disconnects are so that you have a system that's actually doing the heavy lifting for you. It's the reason why our clients are able to succeed so much faster and they hit their 5-year goals in 6 months. Why we have clients who go from making 10K months to making 60K months in a matter of 90 days. It's all because we're looking at the entire approach holistically and really creating a system that sets apart in acknowledging the intent process and setting people up to make purchasing decisions. So again, if you want to learn a little bit more about how we can do this directly with you, I'd love to invite you to our growth optimization call. This is done directly with me. You and I will sit down. We'll look at your current process for how you're actually bringing in new people and how you're nurturing and converting them. I'll share with you exactly where I see the biggest opportunity points, where you're probably leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table, and exactly how our EasyS method can support you in resolving that and creating a system that helps your leads actually sell themselves using the Netflix effect. I invite you to book a call over at easyesleads.com/call. But if you want to learn a little bit more about the EasyS method and exactly how it works, head on over to check out our free bingeable mini series where we break down how we use the Netflix effect to get our leads to sell themselves. Head on over to easyesleads.com to check that out now. And as always, we love and appreciate when you subscribe, rate, and share this episode with somebody that you feel like this would be helpful to. And until next time, here's to keeping it real.